Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get our program started shortly. My name is Kendra Whitlock Ingram. I'm the Executive Director of the Robert and Judy Newman Center for the Performing Arts here at the University of Denver. And I am so thrilled to be here at the Korbel School in this beautiful facility. You know, we don't get outside of our little facility on the south end of campus very often, so it's really great to be partnering with Korbel School on this event tonight. I have a couple of quick announcements for you. First of all, housekeeping. This is a relatively casual event, so there's food and drink throughout. Please feel free to get up and get what you need quietly throughout the next hour. We will have a Q&A at the end of tonight's event. And if you haven't purchased tickets yet for the concert on Friday, we're almost sold out. So we really hope that if you haven't purchased tickets, we can get you in. We do have some seats held back specifically for this group tonight. So again, really great to be here. We're so grateful to our friends at the Korbel School of International Studies, and we're especially grateful to our friends at Bonfils-Stanton, who Bonfils-Stanton Foundation is a funder for the University of Denver for the Korbel School, and also for the Newman Center. Bonfils-Stanton is supporting our performance this week of Silkroad Ensemble. So let's give Bonfils-Stanton a round of applause for their support. So, on with the show. We are so fortunate here at the University of Denver to have such incredible faculty and programs. I want to introduce first our DU representatives. For some reason, this keeps going in and out. Pardis Madavi. Pardis, raise your hand. Pardis is yes, give her a round of applause for sure. She is currently our acting dean of the Joseph Korbel School of International Studies here at DU. And before coming to Denver, she was at Pomona College for over a decade, looks like, where she served as professor and chair of anthropology and director of the Pacific Basin Institute at Pomona College, as well as dean of women. I don't know what's going on here. Okay. Her research interests include academic freedom, diversity and inclusion in higher ed, gendered labor, human trafficking. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cullen. Migration, sexuality, human rights, youth culture, transnational feminism, and public health in the context of changing global and political structures. She has published 4 single-authored books and 1 edited volume, in addition to numerous journal and news articles. She has been a fellow at the Social Sciences Research Council and also the American Council on Learned Societies, Google Ideas, and the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. This is our dean. She's amazing. She's also just a really great person to work with and has been an incredible partner. She was really the genesis of this idea when we first talked about having Silkroad here. Also from the Korbel School, we have Cullen Hendricks. Cullen? Cullen has a very interesting background as well. He's the director of the C. Kang Center for International Security and Diplomacy, and he is associate professor here at the Korbel School. He is also a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and a senior research advisor at the Center for Climate and Security, both in Washington, D.C. And the really interesting thing, if that's not interesting enough, is in addition to his academic career, he has worked as a musician and a music journalist. I was very interested to read this. We might have to talk later. Interviewing artists ranging from country rockers Lucero to metal demigod Slayer. You've interviewed Slayer? That's really cool if you don't know that. That's like a really big deal. His current band, Sleep Union. What kind of band is Sleep Union?
Retired dad punk.
Yeah, okay, punk band. Released their first EP in 2018. So please welcome Cullen Hendricks. And our very special guests to Denver this week. We are so, so grateful to have you here, members of the Silkroad Ensemble. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but first I'll introduce one of the members, Christina Pato.
Thank you, Kendra. Thank you so much for welcoming us. I'm gonna stand because now I feel like I have to stand after her. I have a very thick Spanish accent that I am very proud of. But if you don't understand something I'm saying, just raise your hand and I will try to make it thicker for all of you. I wonder how many of you have heard of Silkroad before today? Wonderful. How many of you have seen Silkroad live? Beautiful. How many of you play a musical instrument? Wow. And how many of you were born in the US? Beautiful. So Silkroad is an organization that was founded 20 years ago by this amazing humanist that is Yo-Yo Ma. He had a very, very simple question in mind, which is what happens when strangers meet? What are the conversations that can spark just with the fact of these strangers meeting? Silkroad is not only what you saw on a stage when you came to see us live. It's not only a performing arts organization. It has many different layers. We operate, what you see on the stage is just the tip of an iceberg that is based on the many different values that we have on our mission. And I think we are going to be discussing a little bit of that during today's conversation. But Silkroad have an amazing learning programs all around the US and all around the world. We also commission composers, and we are in partnership with many institutions, academic institutions, but also other nonprofits and other organizations around the world. Some of us have been in the organization for many years. Some of us have been in the organization for a few months. And in fact, maybe this is the first time we are meeting the two of you. But today was also the first time Joe and Maz met, and they're going to be performing tomorrow together. So that will give you a little bit of a basis of what this organization is about. This is a collective in which all of us are individuals with independent lives, and we bring that into the collective. The collective doesn't have a specific form or shape. Every tour is different, and every activity we do, we draw from this collective to bring whatever we feel is going to be meaningful to the conversation. So maybe the next time you see Silkroad may not look like the last time you saw Silkroad, but that's part of the beauty of the project, that we are not full-time employees, that we keep our conversations going back into our whatever we call home, and then we bring that back to the collective, we share it, and then we take it back. So I'm just going to pass this microphone to Maz, and we'll go around the Silkroad artists, and I will introduce myself last, if that's okay.
Well, hello. My name is Maz Swift, and I am definitely the newest member of Silkroad on this stage at this time. And I'm a violinist and composer and singer and improviser and educator.
Good evening. My name is Joe Gramley. I'm a percussionist. I'm a multi-percussionist, so I traverse different genres and styles. And I'm lucky enough to have played with Silkroad for about 19 years now. So, thanks.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sandeep Das from India. My first trip to the US was 1990 to play concerts. Then about 19 years back, I first met Yo-Yo and started playing with the ensemble. So like Joe, 19 years running. And I play an Indian instrument called the tabla. And like Maz, dabble in a little bit of composing, teaching, talking, and listening to my wife.
Hello, my name is Kinan Azme. I'm a clarinetist and a composer based in Brooklyn, New York. I'm from Damascus, Syria. I've been in the US for the last maybe 19 years, more or less. Joined the ensemble. There was not a real official beginning, actually. It was a smooth join in a way, but that's maybe about 6 years ago. And yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for being here. Christina.
My name is Christina and Asmaz and Sandeep and Joe and Kinan. I have multiple lives, but the most visible one is as a bagpiper. I'm from Galicia, in the northwest corner of Spain, and I am a proud immigrant to this country, and I am also passionate about education and what is the role of the arts in the 21st century society.
Thank you so much. I want to also add my welcome to you all. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to the Korbel School. For those of you who've never been here, this is Maglione Hall. It's one of our favorite rooms. So welcome to the Korbel School. Welcome to the University of Denver. And for our out-of-town guests, welcome to Colorado. Welcome to Denver. We're very happy you're here. It's really, truly such a delight to have you here and to be able to be a part of this conversation and to be one of the strangers who gets to meet and dialogue with you all. It's truly an honor, so thank you for that. So we're here tonight to talk a little bit about where arts and culture meet diplomacy and meet international affairs. For those of you who don't know, we are a School of International Studies, and we've just launched a new initiative on cultural diplomacy thanks to the Bonfi Stanton Foundation. We've been able to start thinking about the role of culture and cultural diplomacy. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that this evening. But before we delve into that, I've been really struck by what Christina was saying about, a meeting place, a place to exchange ideas. And I actually wanted to start by inviting all of our artists to speak a little bit about your own personal journey. What brought you to music, and really what brought you to this ensemble? Tell us a little bit more about your own journey, if you will.
Well, my journey started with a complaint from school. My father was called to the school and told that I disturbed the class by tapping on the desk. And when I'm asked to stop, I tap with my feet. I should be taken to a doctor. Fortunately, I was born to a very smart father. I went back home thinking, oh, he'll be mad. I saw my instrument on a coffee table. And instead of him being mad at me, I said, what are those, Dad? And he said, that's a tabla and your lessons start tonight. So yes, very fortunate to have a great dad who also invested rightly. As Asian parents, all you think about is engineering, doctor. Law. Yeah, if you don't fit into those three categories generally, right? But he felt he would invest in music, and he took me to the best possible tabla maestro in my country. Something of interest for all of you would be that I didn't go to a school of music or a college of music, but I went and lived with my guru for 12 years. And every single Indian classical music worth his or her salt have all been produced in the same process, though we also have schools and colleges and universities of music. But every single successful musician has come from the Guru Sishya Parampara, where a student goes and lives with the teacher, and it's not a teacher-student relation, it's almost like a father-son relation, and you live your music and you learn it as a way of life. So that's my learning experience. My debut concert was always when I was least prepared. So my first ever concert at the age of 15 was with a very famous Indian sitar maestro called Ravi Shankar. I was told that I'm playing that concert 30 minutes before the show. And the only tip my guru gave me is he pointed at his shoe in the car and he said, if I see fear in your eyes, that's what's going to come flying at you. So that's how I learned. We were always taken to a cliff. So the only option was dying. Either you die trying to jump off and can't fly, or you don't jump and your guru kills you. So luckily, I always took the option of jumping. And that's how I learned flying. I hated him then, but I've been playing professionally 23 years now. Every day, he turns from a guru to God for me. And every pearl of wisdom is a diamond in my pocket that I show to the world and earn some respect. So that's my musical background. I started traveling all over the world, 1990, playing Indian classical concerts. Then I got a letter saying, Yo-Yo Ma wants you to join and play with an ensemble. which is the debut concert. World premiere concerts will happen at Lincoln Center with the New York Philharmonic. I didn't know who Yo-Yo Ma was. Why I'm saying that is that will give you an idea of how diverse a background we come from. So I had played at the Lincoln Center, I had played at Carnegie Hall, but I had played Indian classical concerts. So I didn't know who Yo-Yo Ma was. I looked at the amount that they were going to pay, and the check was very good. So I was like, yes. So it was purely monetary reasons I said yes, but that changed my life. My first rehearsal, I walked up on stage and a woman walked up and put a metal stand in front of me and I said, "What is that?" And she said, "That's your music stand." I'm like, "Oh, that's blocking my view though." Then another woman walks up and put some pieces of paper in front of me and I said, "And what is that?" And she said, "That's your music." And I said, "But I can't read." So Kurt Masur was the conductor, New York Philharmonic. That is when this man with a big violin stood up. I was corrected later that that's a cello. And he said, "You know what? How would you like us to proceed with this rehearsal?" I said, "Well, if you guys play this piece once through, I should be able to memorize it." Also, I learned later you don't say that to New York Philharmonic for a piece that's 28 minutes long. But thanks, that's when I fell in love with this man with the big violin, because he said, "You know what? Let's do what this guy is saying." And he started the conversation in a music. He said, "Let's do what this guy is saying. I know these Indian musicians do weird tricks." And they played it one time through, and I raised my hand meekly, and I said, "Yeah, I can play it." So there was again disbelief, but that one piece opened doors. I was touched by his playing without even knowing who he was. I went to the principal violist, and I said, "That man on the big violin." And she said, "Cello?" I said, "He's so good." And she's like, "Yo-Yo Ma?" I said, "Yeah, is he really well known?" So that's the beauty, that the love, the respect didn't happen because I knew who he was or how famous he was. It was the conversation that he started with playing his cello that touched something in my soul. And we have become friends. And it's been 19 years, and I look back to every second of those 19 years as the best moment of my life. Meeting him, and because of him, all my friends here on stage. And I would say I have grown not only musically, but I have become more human just because of the Silkroad Ensemble. Yeah, thank you.
Really? I have to follow that. But it's an honor to sit next to Sandeep and with all of my friends here. My journey has a lot of similarities. It started in a different place, but with great fortune, I've ended up here today sitting next to someone like Sandeep and Christina. I'm from a farm in Oregon. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. And my parents were always very supportive of whatever any of the children wanted to do. At age 13, I gravitated to the drums. I played a lot of sports when I was a kid with my brothers and on teams, and I was very attracted to the physicality of percussion. And I think that I guessed right. It worked out really well for me in terms of the feeling that I get when I play percussion, and at that time it was drums. So I left home when I was 15 because there weren't a lot of opportunities for me in Oregon. And I started to head east. And this started a very sort of peripatetic journey for me of studying. I'm classically trained. I went to the Interlochen Arts Academy studying orchestral music. Then I went to the University of Michigan studying orchestral music, and began to study global musics and new music, mixed chamber music. And then I moved to New York and I went to Juilliard for my master's degree. By that point, because I was a percussionist and because I had so many giving and gracious and empathetic teachers who opened my ears and my eyes to the music of other cultures, and because I was a percussionist, I found a way in to that music. I decided at that point when I moved to New York that I wanted to do pretty much anything and everything I could in music. luckily, I was a percussionist, and so I could find my way into the music of composers who looked outside of our own borders for inspiration. It was through that lens that I met a Chinese, now American pipa virtuosa, Wu Man, who's here with us in Denver and who you saw on the video. We were playing an opera together by a Chinese composer, and she introduced me to yo-yo through that, and I was asked to join the Silkroad project, as it was called then, in the year 2000 in the summer up at Tanglewood. And from there, I've continued to try to cross-pollinate into any and every type of music that I can get my hands on, literally. And so that's sort of a brief snapshot of the journey that brought me here today.
I didn't realize you were the youngest of the 6. I knew you were 6, but I didn't realize you were the youngest. I'm the youngest of 4 women, and my mother became a widow very soon after, so I grew up with women all my life. I'm also from Galicia, which is this tiny corner in the northwest of Spain, a place in the world that before this other part of the world was known to the other part of the world, Galicia was considered the end of the world. In fact, we have a village in Galicia that is called Finisterre, that is literally in Latin, the end of the world. So that's the reality of my community. In Galicia, and the good thing about the Catalonia problem right now is it helps me to explain Galicia a little bit better. In Spain, we have 4 official languages: Spanish, Catalan, Basque, and Galician. Historically speaking, Catalonia, Galicia, and the Basque Country, we were other kingdoms until we became Kingdom of Spain. So in Galicia, speaking Galician and playing Galician bagpipe is actually a responsibility. My parents were born during what we call the hunger generation in Spain, people born during the Spanish Civil War. They were from the middle of nowhere in rural Galicia, which is like being invisible, and they immigrated to Venezuela very early. My mother went to serve in a house when she was 16, and my father went there to work as whatever job he had around. They met there in the Newman Center in Venezuela. And then they married, they had my oldest sister, and then they moved back to Galicia. My father was an accordion player, and my grandfather had a ballroom place. So music in my family was nothing about being on a stage. It was mostly about being with the people and for the people. It's just for dancing and having fun. So we just wanted, my sisters and I just wanted to be like my father and his brothers and sisters. But for my parents' generation, that is not a career. So if you wanted to go through music, and actually if you feel like you wanted to have a career in music, you had to go to the Classical Music Conservatory, which is exactly the opposite of what we wanted to do. But we had to. So the bagpipe school in my generation and the Classical Music Conservatory were 2 buildings next to each other. I come from a city of 100,000 people. 10,000 of them in my generation, because I was born right after Franco, the dictator, died, 10,000 of them were involved in the Galician bagpipe school. And I could count with the fingers of my hand, including my sisters, how many of us were going to both places. There was a really invisible social wall in between folkloric music and classical music. But my mother wanted us to have the best education possible, everything she could not have or afford, so we had to be the best too. So we went through the whole thing. I was also a bagpiper. I was like having the 2 lives, and I got very lucky very early in life because I had like a pop rock band when I was 15, and I got discovered by a crazy record label guy, and then I released an album when I was I turned 18, and I became famous for being a female playing bagpipes. And then I had to carry that for a while. Like, what does it mean to be a woman doing something that people is not used to see? And especially when you do that in rock and roll. So in 2003, when I finished my record contracts and all the contracts that I have signed when I didn't know what I was signing, I decided to move to the US and get my doctorate, which is what my mother have been like complaining for those 5 years. You need to get a doctorate, you need to get a doctorate. So I came here, I got a doctorate, and on the second year of my doctoral program in 2006, a composer came to the school. By the way, my doctorate bagpipes, because of course you cannot get bagpipes. My doctorate is in classical piano, collaborative piano, which is pretty much chamber music and playing with singers. And I love coaching singers. So the program, the vocal studies program, called me because they got a score by a composer, an Argentinian Russian Jewish composer, who wrote a piece in a language that seems very similar to Spanish. And I look at the score, and that was freaking Galician. That's my language. The language nobody knows anything about it. And I had to coach a singer in New Brunswick, New Jersey, in my own language. And I just got super excited. That guy, the composer, was at that moment working for Silkroad and writing a piece for them. So 4 months later, he calls me and he says, why don't you come to Tango Good? We are meeting a bunch of friends, bring your bagpipes, and the rest is history. Like 14 years later, here I am with all of this amazing family, and I am still struggling about breaking the invisible barriers between what is and what is not music in today's world.
So when I was about 4 years old, started telling everyone I was a violinist. I just kind of went around saying that. I think I'd heard that thing is called a violin, and the person who plays it is a violinist. So I was like, oh, that's what I am. And I remember people laughing and saying, well, you need a violin to be a violinist. And I'm like, oh, right, but I'm a violinist. So my parents made an honest girl of me at 6 years old and got me a violin. And I just really fell in, my first love, I always say, is Western European classical music, the stuff that I heard in my house, the romantic stuff. And and my parents always kind of said, well, you're gonna go to Juilliard. I'm like, okay, like I don't know what that is, but that's where I'm gonna go. All right, fine. So I skipped some grades and was born sort of early in the school year, so I was actually quite young, but at 16 I went to Juilliard and found that it wasn't necessarily the place for me after all. I'm skipping over a lot of stuff because we don't have all night. But I did hear at that time a friend of a friend was sort of improvising on his cello, and he was like, you know, there was a lot of jazz in my house as well as classical music. My parents are, you know, choir leaders, so there was always music, and we all sang together. But I started hearing stringed instruments playing jazz music, which I just had never heard, even though it had been happening for decades. But I was really on that, like, okay, violin, classical music track. I want to be a soloist, not even in an orchestra. I want to be a soloist. But then that really spoke to me, and I was like, well, what is this that I'm hearing? I mean, I heard, like, Stéphane Grappelli, for instance, who was a French guy who was classically trained on the violin and was really kind of swinging on his instrument. But I had heard something, and it turned out later on that it was the Uptown String Quartet, which was the daughter of Max Roach. Maxine Roach is a violist, and it was her group that was around and playing this amazing mixture of really contemporary music, strange, you know, dissonances, and, you know, what I might think of as more like bebop-y jazz, but also kind of gospel-y, and it just really spoke to me. And then I saw photos of them and saw that there was 4 Black women playing this music, and I can't even think of one Black woman that I was in school with at the time. Yeah, no, I really can't even think of one so that I knew. So that was really enticing to me as a person who always kind of felt like really out of my element, like socially, you know. So I dropped out of Juilliard and started trying to figure out how to play jazz, which was a crazy idea. And it turned out that I had to study a lot to do that, and I wasn't into that anymore. So I quit the violin, basically. And I wasn't playing for a couple of years, and I went and lived on a farm and started improvising with people on this farm, and it was a little less intimidating because they were improvising rock, and I was really into rock, and it was just an easy idiom for me. So I just jumped in with that, found myself coming back to New York, and realizing along the way that the violin, the fiddle, is an instrument that can be found in like all over the world, you know, in different forms, and that it, you know, I could really learn about other cultures and other musics, you know, from the perspective of the violin. So that's kind of what I started doing. Was, well, first I checked into Irish music, and then I checked into a little bit of Jewish stuff, klezmer, but I stuck with the Irish music for a while, and then through that I kind of started, someone put together a project where I played with some Hungarian musicians, and they were exploring this thing called Gypsy Meets Black Fire and Fire. Yeah, and it was exploring the idea of Hungarian gypsy music and Black American music, and the ways that the similar things that have happened to us as people and how it gets expressed in our music. And it was a really wonderful collaborative experience, and I met these amazing musicians, Hungarian musicians, and they invited me to come work with them in Hungary, and I spent a lot of time there learning that music. And you know, it's funny because the thing that actually brought me to Silkroad was another member of the community, Kaoru Watanabe. I just randomly got introduced to him, and because I had been just exploring at this point, somebody said, yeah, call Maz for this thing you want to do, and he did, and it was wonderful. And Shane Shanahan was in that little trio, and Shane is another one of the oldest members of the group that's here with us in Denver. So long story short, that's how I know y'all, and I'm so happy to be here.
It's incredible to hear all these stories, you know, on stage. Lots of the stories we don't know, so we get advantage of sharing them publicly. I mentioned I was born in Damascus. I was very lucky to grow up in a family that is very culturally curious. We were sent, my sister and I. Actually, I was sent as an attachment to my sister, my older sister. Because my parents didn't want to look for a babysitter, so they said, why don't you just go and join your sister in her music lessons? But the idea was that they wanted us to do music because they thought music is very important for the well-being of their kids. Of course, it didn't make much sense back then. For us, it was only unnecessary additional homework. But then I think there are two turning points that happened in my life that really made music the thing that I do, and it made it the mean through which I express myself the best. One of them, I was practicing a piece of music. I was trained as a classical musician. You know, I was trained playing Bach, Brahms, and Beethoven. There's one moment when I was maybe, I think, 10 or 11. I was playing a piece. I think it's some melody from a Tchaikovsky symphony, and I started to cry. And it was a very strange sensation. I'm sure lots of us have this moment, being exposed to arts when you do something and suddenly you're moved beyond what you can really explain. And that moment I will never forget. It was a moment where I felt a connection with something that is larger than what I am, and I wanted to explore that. Another really crucial moment was my parents gave me as a present after a trip they took to Budapest. They got me 2 LPs. One LP had a Mozart concerto, maybe some Rossini pieces, and another LP was gypsy clarinet playing. And I was amazed that these 2 totally different musical vocabularies were done by the same player and the same instrument. And for me, that's when I started to think about music also in a more all-inclusive sense, if you want. And that was really incredibly inspiring. Mind you, growing up in Damascus, Damascus is a very cosmopolitan city too. Yes, Arabic culture is the dominant culture, if you want. But if you go to like some villages outside Damascus, they still speak Aramaic until today, for example. You get exposed to music, Kurdish music, Armenian music, ancient Syriac chanting. So all of this was in the background. My dad is a classical music fanatic. You know, he used to make my sister and I sit way before I can remember. He used to make us sit on a couch in the living room, playing some LPs, the classical repertoire, while pretending to be the conductor. And we believed him because he knew exactly that the timpani was gonna come from the right speaker, so he'll go like this with a pen, and then the timpani actually comes from the right speaker. So the love for classical music came quite early on. My mom was all about Arabic music. So I didn't know, growing up, I didn't know the differences between these musics. All what I'm saying, for me, music was a continuum back then, and it continues to be so right now, I think. I went to school. I did a double degree in music at the Damascus Higher Institute of Music, but also I did a degree in electrical engineering, in electronics. I was always fascinated by physics. I continue to be so. And once I finished from both, I found myself applying for grad schools in the US. I wanted to study with a specific teacher that I wanted to study with, and that's what brought me to New York. I went to Juilliard to study, and then, like New York does to lots of people, it sucked me in. I continued to shuttle back and forth between Damascus and New York until 7 years ago. And but around, I think, 2012 was the moment where I got an email. Would you like to join us for this residency with the Silkroad Ensemble? Of course, 2 seconds later, I respond by yes and send right away. I thought they might change their mind if I don't reply right away, I guess. And here it is, and I've been incredibly lucky to be sharing the stage with an incredible wealth of information and inspiration on stage. So that's in short.
Thank you all for your willingness to share your personal journeys. It's just incredible. So we're here tonight to celebrate this incredible group, but also to recognize the contributions that groups such as Silkroad make in the realm of cultural diplomacy, or the use of art and performance to foster better cultural awareness and mutual understanding. So cultural diplomacy, for those of you who don't know, is essentially a different approach to diplomacy. Some people talk about soft power. You know, here at the Korbel School, it's especially important to us because our school is named after the father of Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Joseph Korbel. And Secretary Albright and Joseph Korbel were very strong believers and are, Secretary Albright continues to be, strong believers in the importance of cultural diplomacy and ways in which culture can actually play a huge role in making bridges, building bridges, especially to cultures or countries where those bridges may not seem to be the most natural fit. So to some, cultural diplomacy might sound high-minded but impractical. When we think of diplomacy, we usually think of statecraft and strategy, or what we would call hard power. So I want to start by asking, and maybe Cullen, you want to jump in here, how important is cultural diplomacy as a means for building a better and more just world?
Well, thank you very much for that question. Let me add my welcome to that you've heard so far. It's incredibly humbling as somebody who likes to think of themselves as a musician, but who's probably just a person who spent a lot of time in the vicinity of musicians to be sharing the stage with such an accomplished group of people here tonight. You know, I think that the concept of cultural diplomacy is something that has probably, in some manner, been with us since the first time any two humans interacted by sharing a piece of creative work that was imbued with their joy, I think their personal experiences, the accumulation of talent and skills. It is something that has been with us, I think, eternally, and it's something that I think will be with us, even transcending the context we find ourselves in now, where I think that there are so many movements, both here in the United States and abroad, that are trying to highlight the differences between us. And so I think one of the things that's incredibly powerful is the fact that a group like Silkroad and a performance of this type allows us to recognize our differences. It allows us to recognize differences of culture, but it allows us to transcend those differences in ways that are incredibly beautiful and powerful and meaningful. Now, this is, cultural diplomacy is a concept that has been used as an instrument of hard power in the past. I'm just going to tell a brief story about the Cold War. Looking around, I'm guessing many of you remember what the Cold War is. In my classes, I increasingly have to tell people what the Cold War was. So, right. So I'll spare you the background context. But during the 1950s, jazz band leaders like Dizzy Gillespie, Benny Goodman, and Louis Armstrong were drafted into this project of going abroad to project an image of the United States around this uniquely American art form that was jazz music. And it was an incredibly powerful kind of image. It was an image of men and women playing together, Americans from different races. It was an image that I think the United States at the time wanted to, or could only really aspire to thinking of itself as. And it set out this incredibly ambitious kind of national project that we have not fulfilled, but hopefully we are moving toward, of living up to the ideal that was established by having this group that represents this incredible diversity and the power of different kinds of people coming together to create something beautiful and something magical. Now, what I think is just incredibly powerful about the group that we're with tonight, that we're hosting tonight, and why I think so many of you are here, is that this is not a group that has been put together, or that I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, takes inspiration from sort of projecting the national image of any state or people. It is rather about collaboration around those differences and across those cultural differences, taking this incredible richness and diversity and bringing it all together in service of the human condition. And I can't think of anything that's more beautiful than that.
Thank you. Do any of you want to weigh in? Do any of you want to weigh in on that question? The role of, cultural diplomacy and maybe expanding on, I think, Cullen's point. When we talk about diplomacy, typically we speak about people managing the international affairs of a one country or a one culture. But that isn't the case with Silkroad, right? That it's kind of an amalgamation. And of course, you don't represent any one country or any one national perspective. So how do you as an ensemble alter this paradigm, alter this perspective, and intervene on this different way of thinking about cultural diplomacy just by the mere fact of you playing together?
I'm going to pass the microphone to you in a second, but some of the questions we had in mind when we were writing here is about the definition of cultural diplomacy and how many answers we may get out of that if we ask the room. It could be very similar to how many answers, different answers we get if you ask each one of us in the organization, what is Silkroad and what is Silkroad doing in the world? And that's, to me, the most fascinating thing about this. And I think the most important thing to me about this organization is Yo-Yo has created a safe space for us to just be and do whatever we want. And that's a luxury, and that's just it. I'm back to you.
Yeah.
It's interesting when one talk about concepts like this, cultural diplomacy, where lots of words come associated with it. And I think that sometimes has been problematic for me. Diplomacy is about compromise, at least for me. When you think politically, what does diplomacy mean? People meeting halfway. And I think in that sense, I don't think Silkroad, in the way we work, I don't think we ever meet halfway. We try to go all the way where the other person is. It's not, we try not to water down what we do just because we have to be nice to each other. Especially when you think about art. Art is about, for me, art is about urgency. There's a need for you to express something, right? And in some cases, you can do it on your own. But it's most exciting when you try to express that urgency with a group of people. And when you do that, especially with people who don't maybe share the same musical vocabulary, there are no compromises, really. There are compromises in the method of what you do, but at the heart, you're firmly believe in the idea you're trying to express. So for me, that's very important to mention. In my personal life, I have been the subject. I actually was the object of what lots of people called, cultural diplomacy, being a Syrian musician. I used to play in the U.S. a lot before the war started in Syria, for example. If I play in any little village in the U.S., I'll be considered the Syrian ambassador suddenly, whether I want it or not. But then you realize that it's an adjective that is imposed on you just because the odds are that in this little village, I might be the only Syrian they will ever meet in their lives. So it's on me to give a good impression. You know what I mean? It's very strange. And I think the collective effort is what can bring a real meaning to what cultural diplomacy does. If a project that promotes itself as I think some of the most important projects that use cultural diplomacy are ones that are not promoted as such, where you do a project on stage or off stage, whatever the form is, and you make people ask questions. And lots of the times I have issues with the cultural diplomatic programs is they pretend to have the answer. And I think the opposite should be the case.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to build on that and to maybe, responding to Christina, your point, it's funny, when you think cultural diplomacy, you think compromise. When I think cultural diplomacy, I think representation. And so representation can be somewhat problematic. I mean, I'm Iranian, so I have a similar situation, right? That you become the token or the object, right? But I'm also thinking about the way in which, so my daughter is the only living grandchild of Iran's most famous filmmaker, Abbas Kiarostami. And I think about Kiarostami's films, and I think about what they did, right? That Kiarostami's films were able to intervene globally on a perspective of Iran. That when you said Iran post-revolution, people had images of burning flags and hostages, etc. Right? And then you think of Kiarostami's films, which are so beautiful, and also his photography and his art, and so beautiful and yet so complex and so nuanced. And he was able to bring a whole different vocabulary, to use your terminology, about Iran, right, outside of the country. Now, sure, it was tokenized in some ways, but just the fact of being able to intervene and being able to represent the culture in a different way, I think it meant something in the conversation, right? And so it can be tokenized. I think you're right, but I also think that the representation point, it can be very problematic, but it can also be really important in reframing the dialogue, right? And so, when Kiarostami started to win, for instance, the Cannes Palme d'Or, right? People started talking about Iran in different ways as opposed to just in terms of like a security threat, right?
Right, but I'm sure that Kiarostami, when he made his films, I don't think he was thinking that I want to change how Iran is looked in the world.
No,
he had a more urgent topic in his head.
Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about actually is culture.
Yeah, that's right.
Like you can, again, I'm excited actually with this conversation because one always have to wonder, where is the diplomacy aspect? Because culture by default is to be shared. I don't think you can look in the world now, there's not a single pure culture. That doesn't exist. We all have been interacting for centuries and millennia. So we are already on a very big shared platform. So, and that's what culture does, has been, moving freely among places. I think, yeah, I'm gonna just stop this thought right here.
I was just thinking, and this is part of the conversation we were having in the car, right? Like a lot of us have been working in different programs in our home countries, but also international. And for example, when I think about cultural diplomacy today, like in the sense you were defining it, I'm not thinking about an international perspective. I'm thinking about it in a local perspective. In the world we live today, right now, the problems of communication happen in a very local basis, and the clash, I don't know if that's the right word, but the missed conversations are not happening in the places that should be happening. So I was wondering, I mean, for Jo and for Maz and for Sandeep, like your own examples of cultural diplomacy or your own way of understanding that, because I was actually thinking, for example, the piece I wrote for my mother, who suffers from frontotemporal dementia, and she lost her memory, and the fact that I am a public figure in Galicia and I can be bringing dementia on a stake and make people feel okay, losing their memory. That's my way of being a diplomat. That's my way of actually making my culture understand, hey, you're getting old, we are all gonna be there, so just make your peace with it. But I wonder, where are your connections to that?
So for me, it's about sort of a propagation of empathy and going into whatever situation that I might be in with an empathetic approach. And I'm speaking now musically. I find myself playing with a lot of masters of their traditions on instruments that I did not grow up playing. So now what tradition am I the master of that I can find my way all the way to where Kenan was talking about in terms of either that compromise, in terms of the cultural diplomacy. I have found that my way in has been through beginning a conversation, trusting the other, and viscerally engaging in that difference in a way that forces me empathetically to find where they're coming from and to join them. So I think you have elements of both there. I think I'll stop there, yeah.
You know, I would say when I started playing with the ensemble, I was a very proud Indian classical musician. The great thing about the ensemble is that within the first 1 year itself, when I'm meeting people like Kenan, or I used to play with this Iranian Kamanche player even before Silk Road, his name is Kehan Kalhor. The first time I met him, I was like, wow, he's my cousin. So instead of just remaining an Indian classical musician, I lost my identity in a beautiful way, that I stopped just being Indian because I realized that nothing that I considered as only mine is actually only mine. So that was one of the biggest changes, what Kenan was talking about. Then I think diplomacy can be done on, or you know, the impact of doing something like that can be on many levels. I was walking with Yo-Yo to a press conference in Chicago, and this question hit me. It's like Yo-Yo has given us this amazing platform, this amazing experience. What am I doing to take this forward? And that led me to start an organization in India, and I'm very proud that a country which has the most number of visually impaired children, we started with 3, now we have 7 visually impaired children. I have an organization which supports them to learn music free. We pay for their instruments, their travel, everything is taken care of, and we give them a stipend because they come from such poor backgrounds that the parents will easily take them away from music and put them to work. So that's 2. Recently, after the situation that happened here, which impacted Kenan and a lot of other friends, my friend Kehan and all that, I shared with Yo-Yo, I said, you know, I was very upset, and he said, let's make more music. Now I have a project which I have named Delhi to Damascus, where I have a Syrian oud player and 2 fantastic young Indian musicians. And even in a city in Texas, After my performance in Dallas, actually, the mayor and his wife came to me backstage and said, "We need more people like you." But the credit is not me. The credit is Silkroad Ensemble that made me think on those lines. So I think diplomacy is also a word I also don't like personally, because it's like I'm being a diplomat by hiding something from you. That's how I feel. Yeah, it's like I'm not being honest. The moment there is dishonesty, there is diplomacy. So I think the Silk Road, yes. So what Yo-Yo taught us, Yo-Yo actually taught us to be very honest. I remember one of the first meetings, I would stop after that, is in my tradition, in Iranian tradition, in Syrian tradition, if you are with a senior master musician, you don't put your opinion at the table, you just say yes. So we had a meeting, and I'm not born and raised in US, so I would never joke with Yo-Yo. I would always have tremendous respect, which I still have. But we were having a meeting, and he said, "And we haven't heard from you, Sandeep." And I immediately said, "Yes, I agree." And he said, no. What is it that you agree about? And I'm like, wow, he really wants to give me a chance to talk. So he created that level platform, an environment where we didn't have to lie. We could be honest. And that's the reason that this group has survived so far. And actually, there is true love in this ensemble. And I think that's more powerful than any use of the word diplomacy.
Just want to say one quick thing, which is that something I've been meditating on and thinking about a lot recently is the role of the artist in the world, and what I keep coming to more and more is less needing to make a statement, but letting my art and myself and my life be the statement. So I am no longer trying to lead people to any conclusions. I'm just trying to expose the truth about my life and my experience, and also understand that my experience is not just some isolated thing. So in that way, I don't know if it's diplomacy or not. I also shy away from that. But in that way, I do feel like it can be. That's the only way I feel that art can be powerful. I struggle with that a lot. So and authenticity, yeah. And also, but also, I guess representation, like you were saying, like being seen, you know. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Actually, because when I met Maz, this was like 6 months ago, maybe. I met her playing one of her pieces that made me see something I've never thought about before, and I wonder if you actually wanted to share a little bit of that project, The Invisible.
So after George Zimmerman was let off for murdering Trayvon Martin in Florida, I was angry, and everybody was angry that I knew anyway. And I felt like people were going to forget, that we would rant and rave about it on Facebook and then kind of go back to our lives. And so I started to think about writing music that there are no words in this music. It's just, you know, my own thing getting put into music, but really using the title to remind people of what happened. And I've been thinking about that a lot, like I said, not just for, you know, the project itself focuses on victims of police brutality, and I include the police in that equation because I think that they're victims of a larger thing as well. But then I sort of expanded it and have been just trying to, I'm adapting slave songs for violin and voice, just to tell the story. I think telling the story is kind of the most important part of that. And so that's what that is.
I know.
Well, I was just going to say something briefly, and this is actually me kind of taking off my professor hat and talking, I think, more as a musician. So I'm a drum set player. If you know anything about drum sets, you know that they're large, they're unwieldy, and they take a long time to set up. So if I'd walked out here and brought my kit, they would have started the panel discussion, and right about now I would have been ready to play, right? It would have taken me about 35 minutes to do that. One of the benefits of playing that particular instrument, however, is that because it's pretty unwieldy to get around, there's a lot of demand for it. And it provides you with an opportunity to play with an incredible diversity of artists, primarily a lot of guitar players, but also pianists, cellists, people from very different types of musical backgrounds. And the reason I bring this up is because I think it's very relevant for some of the things that came up earlier in the conversation about when you sit down with somebody, they are bringing sort of a lifetime of thoughts and experience and all of the references and all of the inspirations, things that they've taken from different artists that they've been inspired by. But because you're playing with them for the first time, you have no idea what these kind of things are going to be. And so when they start playing, you have an opportunity to meet them with that same kind of experience and then kind of take turns following them where they are going to lead or having the opportunity to kind of push the conversation sort of forward. And that's something, I mean, just taking, again, kind of maybe taking the diplomacy out of it, that's an incredibly powerful kind of experience. And you don't need to be an incredibly lauded, classically trained musician to have that kind of thing. And I guess I'm saying that because I want to say that that having been a musician, while not my vocation, is something that I love in a completely uncomplicated way and that I think is always going to be part of my life. And so for those of you in the room who raised your hands earlier who are musicians, or think of yourselves as lapsed musicians, I'd like you to consider picking it back up, not just because of the way it makes you feel to play it, but because of the kind of conversations and relationships it can allow you to have with other people. It's an incredibly enriching part, not just of a musician's life, but it can be of your life as well, regardless of whether or not you think of this as your vocation.
Thank you. That's a great way to end the panel. So we have just about 5 minutes for some quick Q&A, maybe 10. I'm sorry that we've gone over, but we wanted to let ourselves have kind of a flowing conversation. And I kind of wish we had more time for that. So I'm glad you'll be here for a couple days. Maybe we can get together again. But why don't we just take a couple questions from the audience very quickly? And I think we have a mic that can circulate. So Anne is going to, please just wait until Anne comes around with the microphone as we are recording this. Thank you.
Hi, I'm an amateur clarinet player, and I strictly play or have played Western and classical music. And I'm curious about, Sandeep mentioned in his opening statement about how he was with the New York Phil and he didn't have any music. And I'm wondering how you guys incorporate, rehearsals and writing music, and do you generate sheet music and then present it to everybody, or how does that work exactly?
So partly the way we were trained, I was trained in those 12 years, everything that I was taught orally to me, so much so that I did hide at night and write some things down in a diary, lest I forget. But my wife was about to garbage those diaries because she never saw me using them. So everything that I learned is sitting here right now, from the very first lesson to the very last lesson that I learned in those 12 years. So that has helped me, or I think people from Persian culture, those cultures, to be able to listen to something. So if I listen to something, I'm immediately, if you think about it, I'm making a sketch in my head. If I hear it second time, or in the first time itself, I make a sketch, I'm putting in the eyes, the nose, and the lips. When it's my turn to play, all I'm doing is I'm coloring that sketch, and the piece is ready. So if you ask me note by note, I won't be able to tell you. But that's what Indian classical music is, that even if I'm playing the same thing every night, it will be different. So the first time I was asked to write a piece for the Silkroad, I told Yo-Yo that, he said, we want you to bring something to the table. And I said, I would love to, but I can't write. So that answers your second part, that he said, how would you do it if you were with Indian musicians? I say, we share ideas. And he's a living proof that when I brought that piece, they kept begging, Sandeep, can we write it down? only 2 years back, they shared that they actually used to go back and write certain things down, only for them to get up on stage for me to tell them, it's like, oh, I'm thinking let's do that part differently. So it's both ways, and I would want maybe Keenan can add to that.
Just to answer how how Silkroad works in terms of repertoire, we split our work in maybe three different categories. We commission sometimes composers to write pieces for us. They came fully written. Everybody has a part. Sandeep has a sketch. And sometimes some of us bring pieces, and these pieces usually are less strict because you're writing for the family. So you write knowing when I write a part for Joe, I know that Joe will take this part and make it by far better than I can ever imagine. So there's that element of trust. So the pieces change actually over time. Most of the time we workshop these pieces, so we spend time rehearsing. Some pieces are just a little lead sheet kind of format. So we maneuver, and some pieces actually never have a score for nobody, right? Are like purely orally transmitted.
So I think we have time for one last question.
Okay, this isn't a question, so maybe somebody else can ask one. Two things. One is what I got from tonight, and I'm going to get emotional, is that we need to quit talking to each other and just play music. And the other thing is, Keenan, when you said someone brings an idea and we don't negotiate it, we just do that, I thought, oh my God, what a concept. If we just explored that person's idea and really experienced it, we could change ourselves and change the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I think at this point we're in for quite a treat because we're going to transition to no more talking and just doing and letting and I'll let Christina frame this. But before I do, I also wanted to just take a moment to thank Kendra and the Newman Center for this incredible partnership. Thank you. I could never have imagined that we would be up here doing a partnership with you. I'm somebody who, I've been a dancer all my life, so art has been important to me, not music, but music as in, yes, of course, I'm not a musician, but I'm a dancer, so it's a huge part of my life as well. I too was sucked into New York when I danced with Ailey. So I was an Ailey dancer for many years, but I never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined that I would have the opportunity to partner with someone like Kendra and the Newman Center. So I just wanted to thank you for this incredible opportunity that you've given us. So thank you. So now I'm going to pass the microphone over to Christina, and she's going to give us a little bit of a framing for what we're about to hear and experience. Thank you.
Yeah, while we set up a little bit of the stage, what was the name of the lady who is walking back and share her thought? Could you just let her know that Caroline? Caroline? Say it again? Caroline. Oh, I just wanted to just follow up on that because the action of doing is not easy. And it's many challenges when you work in an organization like this. Sometimes those challenges are connected to the reality of your instrument. My instrument is a Galician bagpipe, can play in one key or two maybe. So even if they want to negotiate a different way of understanding things, the reality is my instrument can't. I cannot play softer, I cannot play louder. I'm usually the loudest person in the room. That means I have to be the one that speaks the least in a conversation, because if I play more, they will not be able to hear themselves or the other. The challenge is also when you work in an organization that doesn't have an actual leader is things take twice as time to actually get done. And even though we don't use words that much, we use the music to make them talk. The fact that we have to try to feel that democracy of not having an actual leader saying yes or no, we have to feel it. And then we have to find a way of trying. And we are very privileged in the sense that Yo-Yo created that space for us, but in the reality of independent musicians, that is not always the case. We don't have that luxury. So we were thinking about just showcasing this kind of conversation, and what you are going to hear is just that conversation between the diversity and the differences that are in the room on the stage. None of us are gonna be amplified, and the role of technology for us on a stage is huge, because if you are not amplified, Sandeep cannot be here, and the only thing you will be hearing would be me for an hour. And this is literally a conversation between the five of us. It has no name because we are going to be just talking, and the way we talk is improvising. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you again for coming to this event. Thank you, Korbel School. We're so grateful to you. Thank you, Bonfils Stanton, for making this possible. Silkroad, you are amazing. Can't wait for the performance on Friday night. There are still a few tickets available. I did give some email addresses out, but check online first. If not, you feel free to reach me directly and we'll try to figure some tickets out for you for Friday. Thank you again, Silkroad. Thank you, Korbel.